bottom line is, it's not that these socialistic policies aren't working. It's not that these socialistic policies haven't worked. It's that these socialistic policies cannot work. They simply cannot, because they are rooted in false premises. This is one of the main things I talk about on this show, not giving in to false premises, not accepting the straw men that are set up by the other side, because this is not a political battle, this is a philosophical battle. As Ayn Rand said, a political battle is merely a skirmish fought with muskets. A philosophical battle is a nuclear war. We need to have people in Washington, D.C. willing to proliferate and then push the red button if necessary to engage in that philosophical nuclear war. This is about philosophy first and foremost, and one of the first things you learn in dealing with philosophy, in dealing with the area and the avenue of deep thought about interpersonal relationships and political systems and economic systems, one of the very first things you learn is that if you are to accept a false premise, then you will basically have your hands tied for the rest of the argument, and your opponent will have their way with you. What we have done for so long in this country is give ground rather than taking ground. We have allowed the false premise to become mainstream. We have allowed the false premise to needle its way into the psyche of the average American to where it is going to take years, folks, years, possibly even decades, to reverse the damage that has been done through, again, decades and almost a century, to be exact. Almost a century of allowing this false premise to be accepted. What is the false premise? Well, the false premise, quite simply, is the changing around of the definition of natural law, of the implementation of natural law. We have allowed the progressives to flip the script, change the subject, and change the terminology to place us into a box. The bottom line is, going back to the Declaration of Independence, the inalienable rights that we are granted by our Creator, not man, not government, but our Creator, are life, liberty, and property. The pursuit of happiness, literally from the Declaration of Independence, but what was meant was property. Those three things are the basis for the rest of our human interaction, morally, physically, and economically. Life is a series of self-generated and self-sustaining action. We are given the tools granted by our Creator from birth to sustain our lives as long as we generate action that motivates or action that leads us toward that self-sustainment, that fulfillment of our basic needs for survival. Liberty. What is liberty? Liberty encompasses all things, folks. Moral, economic, interpersonal relationships. Liberty encompasses all of those things, and it's quite simply the freedom, the ability to operate in your own rational self-interest so long as you do not infringe upon the rational self-interest of others. All rights, all natural rights that are endowed by our Creator have a specific feature that makes them unique. They do not require anything from anyone else. They do not require anyone else to take action. They do not require anyone else to lift a finger. All that they require is that the other person refrain from violating them. That is it. Property. What is property? Property is as much a moral concept as it is a physical one. Property is not just things. Property is not just tangible objects that you accumulate through a period of years. Property is everything that belongs to you. Your intellect, your body, your physical exertion of energy, and your time. Time is your property as well. Now, when you trade your physical activity and time to an employer for pay. That is a willing transaction. You have willfully given your time and your physical and or intellectual energy to that employer in return for other property that you value more highly, namely money, currency, with which you can purchase, again, through an exchange of value for value, other property, things that you can hold. All of those are your property. Now, the false premise that we have accepted is that somehow, in some bizarro universe, those who have exchanged value for value, those who have exchanged their intellectual energy in return for money, those who have exchanged their physical energy and exertion for money, those who have exchanged their time for money, that somehow those who have done those things and achieved a higher status or achieved a greater income or a greater net wealth, total personal wealth than others, somehow those people who hold more wealth have gained that through some ill means. That's the premise that we have accepted, and it is utterly false. But how many people in this nation understand that, and not only understand that we have accepted it, but understand that it is a false premise? We have people in this country who will give lip service to the notion of the land of opportunity, and yet through their actions, through their policy decisions, through the legislation that they put forth for the greater good, put the lie to their holding up of this ideal of the land of opportunity. Because if they truly believed that America is the land of opportunity, then they would understand that some people have taken advantage of the opportunities that are laid out before them. Some people have worked harder and made the right decisions to accept certain opportunities and reject others, and that has brought them to the point that they are at, amassing the amount of wealth that they have been able to achieve in their life. And that others who maybe have not reached that high a status, perhaps, just perhaps, may have not made the correct decisions, may have not made the most of those opportunities, or may have not engaged in a transaction that is more beneficial for them in the exertion of their time and physical and intellectual energy. Maybe they're bad negotiators. Maybe they're bad decision makers. Maybe they have not handled the property that they were given by God and exchanged later on in life for other property. Maybe they have not made the most of those transactions, and other people have. That's the way of the world. Every human being is unique. Not all human beings are going to use those physical, intellectual, and spiritual, in some cases, gifts to their greatest ability. That does not make one or the other evil. It simply makes them different. But in a collectivist society, you cannot have that individualism. You cannot have those people being different, because somehow it all has to be made even. Even if we must engage in utterly immoral policy decisions to bring about that equality, it's for the greater good, don't you know? And it's complete and utter nonsense. We must reject that false premise. We must explain this. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I am the best person to explain it. Perhaps that last little rant there was a bit convoluted. Perhaps it's not the best way to explain it, but it's the best way I know how. But if we don't make the effort to explain the false premise and where it must be rejected, why it must be rejected, and the premise that we must set up in its place and prove to be the correct premise, if we do not do that, then we truly will be a nation gone under.